is your first time tuning in to this channel, welcome. We would love to have you. Please subscribe. If you've been watching this channel for a while, please subscribe, guys. Hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell next to the subscribe button so that you can get all of the notifications for when we upload new material. So, welcome, 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 welcome. This is a wonderful community. Definitely think about joining. We have a phenomenal time in here, and we also learn how to not just stay sober, but also spiritual. Because if you're not spiritual, the sobriety that you have, you're probably not going to be able to hold on to very long, or it's not going to be quality. And remember, we want to always shoot for quality sobriety, emotional sobriety versus quantity. So everybody can get clean time. We're past that, guys. This is a community for people who are seeking a lot more than just clean time. In other words, you know, we're not just peeing clean in a cup here. We want to be living a spiritually fulfilling, authentic life. So if that sounds like something you might want, come on in. The water's fine. Go ahead, subscribe. We would love to have you. All right. Okay, guys, on that note, welcome. Rehab4theSoul Session number 11. That's right. These go to 11. The topic for today is codependency. Yes, codependency, relationships, one of my favorites, okay? I cannot get enough of this topic. I love to talk about it. It's one of the major pitfalls of people who are in recovery. One of the first things they want to do when they get sober is jump into a relationship, okay? So what I want to do today is I want to talk about relationships, codependency. I want to define codependency for you. I'm going to explain why codependency happens, how it happens, what the dangers of codependency are, and also what you have to do if you find yourself in a relationship that you identify as codependent, what you need to do to kind of get out of that. All right? And by the way, guys, just because a relationship is codependent doesn't mean you have to end the relationship. This is very, very fixable. That's probably a very common question I get from people in sobriety is, you know, do I have to end my relationship? You know, I was with this person when I was using, it was toxic, I'm trying to get sober. You know, whether they use or not is irrelevant. That's what I'm going to tell you. That's irrelevant. But, you know, it's a big question. People think that they have to leave behind the relationship in order to get sober, and that's not always true. It's really not always true. So I want to give you some sort of game plan on how to go about beginning to get yourself healthy first, so then the relationship can either fall in place or not. But we're going to look at all that. So here we go. Codependency. First thing we need to do is identify that. So what is codependency exactly? Well, when we break the word codependency down, we have two primary things. We have this prefix of co, which simply means two or more, or like together. All right. And in this case, when we're talking about relationships that are codependent, two people. All right. So we got two people. And then we have the word dependency. And when someone is dependent on something, the definition of that is they need it. Okay, they need it to survive. And whether that need for survival is real or perceived does not matter. Okay, you know, relationships are so dramatized on TV and social media, and you know, the whole Romeo and Juliet thing, and you complete me. No, but you don't, because if you're out there and you think you're looking for your better half, as they say, you need to understand that you are whole to begin with. You are whole to begin with. You aren't half. You don't need anybody to complete you. Okay, and that's where the problem of codependency really, really starts, okay? So again, two people coming together, dependent meaning you feel like you need it to survive, like you are not going to be able to go along without it. Simple? Simple enough. Codependency defined in terms of a relationship. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, what does codependency look like? So when we're talking about substance abuse, drug and alcohol use, we know that people use substances in order to feel how? Better or worse? They use substances to feel better. So the premise is that initially they're feeling bad about self, right? There's unhealthy feelings there. There's low self-esteem there. Feelings of guilt, shame, anger, anxiety, depression, inadequacy. You feel like you're not enough. Low self-worth. All of those feelings were there before the addict alcoholic picked up and started using. And some people will say, well, they feel that way because they're using. That's not true. Addicts and alcoholics felt inadequate and all of that junky stuff way before they ever picked up, whether they are able to acknowledge that or not. So you guys hear that, whether you guys are able to understand that or not, those feelings existed way before you started using. You just weren't really in tune to them. And it's important that we recognize that, because once we understand that those feelings of lack of self-worth, doubt, insecurity are really the problem, then drug and alcohol becomes irrelevant and we understand it's just a symptom. Okay? All right. So, why does it happen? Well, when we ask the addict alcoholic to stop using, and they do, like they put the drugs and alcohol down, if they don't replace it with something healthy, which is spiritual alignment, in my case, I teach spiritual alignment, that's realigning with true, real, authentic self, getting back in touch with your authentic self and who you really are. That's what you're supposed to pick. You're supposed to pick back up in recovery. You're supposed to get back in alignment with your true self if you are really working the program that I teach here and that I subscribe to. Then you're going to be okay. But the problem is most addicts and alcoholics put the drugs and alcohol down and they think that that's all they have to do, and that's not the case, because you can stop using drugs and alcohol, but if you don't make the internal changes, within yourself, which is how you're feeling, which is yucky and depressed and low self-esteem and low self-worth, those are still going to exist. You're feeling all that, you're just not using. Okay, so you are reaching to pick something else up, and what people find is, what do? They get into a relationship, and they make that other person responsible for their self-worth and for their happiness. I'm going to say that again. They make that other person responsible for their self-worth and their happiness. And this can work one way, guys, or this can work two ways. Okay? In other words, both people can be coming into the relationship and be codependent. One person can be coming into the relationship and be codependent. It doesn't mean that the other person necessarily is. But over time, if a relationship like that continues, the person who came into the relationship is somewhat healthy. If things don't change, that person is going to get dragged down into the undercurrent and bondage of codependency as well. And what usually happens is when a person tries to then leave that codependent relationship, the person who is codependent on them starts to do what we call holding them hostage emotionally. And that sounds a little something like this. I just can't live without you if you leave me. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I can't do it. I'm gonna kill myself. Yeah, it gets really, really ugly, really, really, really fast. And suicidal threats can start happening, homicidal ideations and things can start happening, domestic violence can start to blow up in these places. These relationships are severely, severely dangerous and can get to an extent. Now, that is an extreme, okay? And we need to think of codependency as being on a continuum. And what that means is not all cases are that severe, right? Some cases are more mild or moderate or severe, but they're all, on the edge of being, unhealthy. And so the goal is, the longer the relationship is codependent, the more unhealthy it gets and the more it starts to move towards the severe spectrum of this, all right? And it can vacillate back and forth. Sometimes in the lifespan of the relationship, it can become sicker than others, okay? So it's important to remember that. But again, it doesn't mean that the relationship is doomed. And just on a side note, when someone starts talking about, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself, that's what we call holding someone emotionally hostage, because the other person that hears that feels responsible, and then they feel the bondage of having to stay out of fear that their partner is going to hurt themselves. Health emergency now. Okay, and if somebody wants to even just act like they're in a state of a mental health emergency, then you need to treat them like they are in a state of a mental health emergency, which would be calling 911 and having medical, psychological professionals come over to assess them and determine the lethality of their threats, and possibly do a 72-hour inpatient observation, okay? Because you never, ever, ever want to just assume that they're full of shit and they're not serious. You want to take any type of threat like that seriously, regardless of the response of the addict alcoholic in that situation, okay? So if they want to act like they're in a state of mental health emergency, you have to treat it like it's a state of mental health emergency. All right? All right. So codependent, the need to survive. You need the other person or the relationship to survive. So the problem with that is when you're putting your well-being all onto another person. You're putting your self-esteem, you're putting your self-worth, and you're putting your happiness all onto this other person. So if this other person decides one day that they want to move on and they don't like you, or they want to do other things, you're done. Like, your world has crumbled. You're giving somebody else all of your power. You're giving your power away. And that is the problem. That is the problem, because human beings are fallible. What does that mean? That means as human beings, we make mistakes. We say things that are going to hurt other people. We don't mean to, but sometimes we say and do things that hurt other people's feelings. And by no means do we have intention to do that, but it just kind of happens sometimes. And other people, human beings, will let each other down. It's just how it goes. It's just how it is. So if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, and the basket breaks, that's a problem. You need to be responsible for you and how you feel. You need to be responsible for your self-worth. All right? So you're just replacing your dependency or your need for drugs and alcohol. You're just replacing the drugs and alcohol with a person now. Now your dependency is on that person. And the dependency being on anything outside of you and yourself is what makes this healthy or unhealthy altogether. All right, guys? So here we go. Two people. And pardon me, I am not an artiste, obviously, but two circles here. You have two people, all right? These two people are going to be moving together into a relationship, okay? Now, what a healthy relationship looks like this when two people come together. You have these two circles, two people coming together. And you'll notice how there's a merging of each individual into the other. So this shaded part here represents the relationship between two people. All right, but you'll notice here that what is also present, there's this relationship where two people come together and form this unit independently, but also this space here, this is where there's still room for the individual outside of the relationship, okay? It's so important, guys, to be your authentic self, not just in the relationship, but to also have part of you left out of the relationship. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean, you have your own hobbies and interests. You do things independently of your partner. You're not going to 12-step meetings together, because it doesn't work that way. You have your own interests and your own hobbies, your own set of friends. This isn't selfish, okay? And you also have your own opinion that's independent of the relationship. In other words, you can think for yourself here. You can decide what's healthy for you, what you want out of a relationship, not somebody else telling you what you want, who you are, and what you need. All right? So two people coming together, this is what the healthy relationship looks like. When the relationship is codependent, though, two people coming together that are codependent, the relationship looks like this. Okay? Right there, the relationship looks like this. Guys, what's the problem with this? When you look at the healthy relationship versus unhealthy, what's the problem? What do you notice? Well, you notice first and foremost, you can't tell where one person begins, where one person ends, and the other person begins. There's no individuality here outside of the relationship. And it becomes what we call there's a word for it, it's called enmeshed. Okay, it becomes enmeshed, where two people just enmesh together, and it gets really, really sick. And again, this is where a lot of abuse, domestic violence cases can happen, emotional abuse, physical, mental abuse, trauma, things like that happen. Most of the time, the majority of the time, adults that get into relationships that look like this are coming from a dysfunctional family unit where there probably was poor boundaries, authenticity was devalued, your independent needs and authentic self didn't matter. You're probably coming out of a household that was, their drug and alcohol use was prevalent, or there was sexual trauma or some type of abuse, or, your second, third generation, what we call adult child of an addict alcoholic, okay? So these are learned patterns of behavior. They don't just sporadically happen. These are learned patterns of behavior within relationships, okay? So here you are, right? We defined codependency. I explained to you now how it happens, what it looks like. Why is it dangerous? Why is it dangerous? Well, because when you're you're giving your power away to somebody else. You're giving your whole, meaning of life, all of that you're putting on another person. And that's not cool. You need to make your own decisions independent outside of the relationship. And if there's drug and alcohol, now mind you, these types of relationships happen whether somebody uses or they don't. So the drug and alcohol use, again, is irrelevant. But if it's present, if addiction is present, odds are when the relationship fails you, because it will, all relationships fail you. And what I mean by fail you, I mean you're going to be let down. It doesn't mean the relationship ends, but you're going to be let down by another human being because we're fallible, we make mistakes. You're going to feel the pain of that. And the addict alcoholic, what do when they feel emotional pain? They want to what? A, not feel it, and B, numb it out. What are they going to use to do that? Drugs and alcohol. So then they return back to the use, okay? And this is where you'll see people, we're together, we're not together. We're together, we're not together. We're together, we're not together. Excuse me. And it looks fucking nuts. Okay? Looks fucking crazy. You guys know who you are. You shouldn't have been getting into the relationship to begin with. You had no business doing that. But there's the drama of it. It's the back and forth, the push-pull. We're in, we're out. We're in, we're out. Really, really not good if it's gotten to this point. So, fourth thing I told you I was going to talk about is if you are in this type of relationship, I told you there's hope. What can you do to excuse me, what can you do to get out of this? Here's what we got to do. So if we are here and the goal is to get here, why this is tricky to do is because when you're so enmeshed with somebody, any type of pulling away can feel like abandonment. Any type of separation of the individual, gradually pulling out of the relationship, even if it's just to build their individual self and not necessarily leave the relationship, can feel like, can leave the other person in it feeling like they're being abandoned. And like I said, the feeling of abandonment is usually coming from some past trauma in childhood. that, abandonment. You're just gonna leave me, you're just leaving me, I can't take care of myself, you're just gonna let me die, leave me here to die. Always with the dramatic shit. So if you're hearing any of that in your relationship, it should really set off some red flags for you. So if the goal is to go from here to here, now this means you have to start developing your own, your own tastes, your own understanding. And the first relationship we are always in, first and foremost, is the relationship with ourselves. Okay, with the relationship with ourselves. So if we are moving into a relationship and we are not in a healthy relationship with ourselves first, anybody else we pull into that dynamic, of course it's going to go to shit. Of course it is. Because you're the foundation of the relationship. And when you're bringing someone else into that and you're not healthy, even if this other person is healthy, which odds are they're not at some level if they're getting involved with you and you're not, even if that other person is healthy, that's going to throw off the whole dynamic of the relationship, and eventually it's still going to become toxic, because it's so much easier to pull somebody down than it is for this healthy person to bring someone else up. Okay? So it usually goes batshit crazy in the end anyway. So what you got to do is you really got to work to start to develop independently, interdependent of each other. That means you need to seek out some type of therapeutic intervention alone first, so you can get to know who you are. Each person gets to know who they really are, and then decide if they A, want to be in a relationship, B, what they have to offer a relationship, C, what does the relationship have to offer them, and D, is this something we want to continue to pursue? So once you get yourself whole, right, you will then attract somebody else who is whole, and then you can move together like this. Now, sometimes people have to kind of, what do they say? I need some space. I just need some space. That's not always a bad thing. It's what each person does with that space that's going to determine if the relationship is A, going to come back together, and B, if it does, if it's going to work out. So if each person is working on themselves during that break or whatever, then odds are you're going to be able to somewhat move to a healthy dynamic. If not, if only one person does the work and the other person stays quote unquote sick or dysfunctional, then all bets are off. And what usually happens is there's the addict alcoholic who's in the relationship with this other person who doesn't use. They're both codependent. The person who doesn't use acts like they're not the problem, and if the addict alcoholic would just stop using, all problems would be solved. And guess what? One day the addict alcoholic does stop using. Okay? Well, that's not exactly good, because then they come back to the relationship, they've done the work to get whole, usually like in rehab or something, and this other person that's outside waiting for them to get their shit together, they don't do anything to work on themselves, even though they're just as sick. And then the addict alcoholic comes back into a relationship and feels guilty, full of shame, like they are going to tolerate disrespect, they are going to tolerate their feelings being belittled, because they're going to say, well, I put this person through so much in my active addiction, she was ride or die for me, Miss April. She was ride or die. No, she was ride or dumb for you, because no woman worth her weight in salt is going to stay in that relationship. No person, male or female, is going to stay in that relationship. And by the way, I don't care what your sexual orientation is, these rules apply. It doesn't matter. So I don't care what your gender is. I don't care what your orientation is. These rules apply no matter what. Dysfunctional relationships are equal opportunity employers. Okay? So, real simple, codependency, we defined it. What does it look like? What are the dangers of it? How do you resolve it? And, if you are stuck here, guys, you cannot do this on your own. Reach out for help, preferably to somebody who's a licensed, and you guys know what I mean by that, someone who's a licensed therapist, someone who's a life coach, an interventionist specialist. You need support. You need support because you need outside perspective sometimes. Okay? There it is, guys. Codependency 101, Rehab for the Soul. You know what I say, it is not rock and roll. It ain't perfect, but it's a rock and roll, and we will catch you on the flip. Bye, guys.